Hey, 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 welcome back to Permission to Shine podcast. It's your host, Andrew Nemani. What is up, guys? I get the good fortune of highlighting the most humble, inspiring people. No exception today, Joey Gonzalez. This man is the most incredible human being, and I cannot wait for you guys to hear our conversation. I've got an extra big smile on my face. If you're watching this video, you'll see it. Landed back in Los Angeles 2 nights ago from being on the road for 2 weeks. Most recently was outside of Dallas, Texas with 38 of my closest friends at our buddy's lake house. A lot of spike ball, pickleball, tubing. My body still hurts. Guys, if you're over the age of 12, you shouldn't be tubing. And I was reminded that this weekend. Such an awesome tradition that we've been able to start out in East Texas. Very fortunate to be back in LA, where I met the wonderful Joey Gonzalez over a year and a half ago. It was my first berries class ever. And if you don't know what berries is, it's a boot camp, right? It's a workout. It's a fitness studio. And you show up and people are kind of like, it's like the club. And when you hear Joey's reason for why it's like the club, it's going to make total sense, right? The founder, Barry, about 26 years ago, was looking to quit drinking, quit drugs. And so he started Berries as kind of a healthier place to have fun. And I love that. I'm always looking for places to go that aren't drinking based, where you can still have a lot of energy and connect with friends and have a good workout. And Berries is that place. Joey has been CEO for 9 years. And when we first met, like I said, it was at a Berries class. And I sparked up a conversation with the guy next to me after class. And he was just a very kind guy. And he was asking me about what I'm doing in Los Angeles and what I'm doing for work. And I finally said, hey, what do you do? And he really quietly mumbles. And he's like, oh, I work for Berries. And I was like, oh my God, like we've been sitting here chatting for 25 minutes. I had no idea. And I'm like, what do you do for him? He's like, CEO. I'm like, excuse me, I couldn't hear you. What'd you say? And he's like, I'm CEO. And I was like, what the heck? It's like, you are so humble to sit here and pretend that you're some little nobody, right? And he made all the conversation all about me. And that's exactly the moment I knew I had to get him on Permission to Shine. And that's what we made happen. It took a year, but Joey and I got to go to a Berries class in New York City and then went on to the studio to record. We had an amazing crowd in the studio that day. Joey is the son of an immigrant. He's a well-educated man from USC to Harvard. He recently took the HQ of Berries from Los Angeles over to Miami, where he's now living with his husband and 2 beautiful kids. Joey, you are an incredibly inspiring human. Your lessons, your stories certainly inspired me, and I think they're going to do that for all of our listeners today. So without further ado, if you've got feedback, if you've got questions, please reach out. I love it when you guys do. Andrew@permissiontoshine.org is the email. You know this, Andrew@permissiontoshine.org. Please enjoy this inspiring conversation with Joey Gonzalez. Peace. You had 2 classes this morning.
Mm-hmm.
You're a freak.
You got to do what you got to do.
Oh my gosh. What time did you wake up?
6.
Okay.
I think.
Berries classes are hard.
They're not easy.
And I'm trying to figure out, are you somebody that's like, okay, I've got a Berries class, I'm going to give it 100% everything I have in the tank? Or do you go like 85%? So you're like, okay, I can come back tomorrow and also keep doing this every day?
I mean, in my opinion, that's the best thing about Berries is that it totally depends on the day. So you can show up and give 100%, or you can show up and just do the best you can. Our attitude as instructors is always, we're just glad you came, which has changed. I mean, back in the day, 26 years ago when Barry was teaching the class, it was very different. It was like, if you weren't giving 100%, it was a problem. And
Get the hell out.
He would do what you did to me today, lean over and turn our speeds up.
You didn't bat an eye.
No,
my friends are like, throw a water bottle at me or something.
I mean, you
You're
took
like,
me up
it.
0.2.
Bring it up more next time.
Yeah.
Oh, it's on.
Barely feel it. Also, you were like 2 miles an hour slower.
Shut
than me,
up.
So I was like, that's kind of odd that he's taking me up.
Oh, damn it. I'm still sweating. It's like 90 degrees in New York right now. You started being CEO in 2015.
Yes.
What was your journey up to that point?
So I first started Berries as a client. I was kind of coming off from age 13 till mid-20s. I was in performing arts. I was doing film and TV and musical theater and everything. And that's what brought me to LA. And I continued to study film and acting at USC. And when I graduated, started to work, had a great agent and manager, and just kind of fell out of love with it. You're from the Midwest. It was just very different in Chicago. It was very intimate. And I loved the people I worked with. And I even loved the people I auditioned against, and it just felt different. And so kind of sunset that career and was just looking for what to do next. And I tried real estate, and I tried massage therapy. Like I tried so many different things.
Were you kind of panicked in that moment?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think that's what your like early to mid 20s are about. Just panicking every day.
Seriously. I felt that. I thought you were going to finance. Once I realized I wasn't, I was like, oh shit.
Yeah.
My life is falling apart.
Yeah. So then I found Barry's. I had heard about it for about a year and a half. And I was very intimidated to go because it just sounded awful. And so finally, I had a friend who was actually a hookup, who one morning on a Saturday was like, you should come to Barry's. And I was like, oh shit, now I have to go. And that's what got me there.
Now the pressure's on.
Yeah, exactly. But when I showed up to class, I was very surprised with just how like friendly everybody was, and how, you know, in the actual studio, the person next to me was helping me like figure out what to do, because it can be confusing your first time on the floor. Same, the people around me, everybody was just so enthusiastic and cheering and having fun, and it just was not at all what I had expected. So I fell in love with it, and I started going twice a day pretty much until Barry finally said, hey, you're here all the time, do you want to work here? I was like, actually, yeah, that's exactly what I want to do. So I started first teaching classes, and then working the desk, became manager of the business, became close with Barry and the partners, John and Rachel Mumford, who, you know, were originally the ones that hired me. And I basically worked, I think, about 4 or 5 years running the business and asking every 6 months or so if I could invest and open up studios with them. And the answer was never no, but it was also never yes. And finally, it took a lot of gumption and bravery, but I walked in to the office one day and said, I'm either doing this with or without you. And that's what it took. And I think they like took a beat, and they were like, all right, let's do it. So
How old were you when you asked that? So brave of you.
God, I think it was 28, 29.
Holy shit, Joey.
At the time I felt old. I had like goals I wanted to reach by the time I was 30. So, but that was, yeah, it took a lot. I remember that day very clearly. And I have a terrible memory, so that's saying a lot. But from then on, I went on to open studios in San Diego, moved to New York. I spent about 5 or 6 years here. I told my now husband, I was like, I'll be back in like 6 months. Just going to open Barry's Chelsea. But it just really took off in New York City. And, you know, I ended up spending 5 or 6 years here. We were opening studios all around the city, in the Hamptons, et cetera. So that was in 2015. I was still here in New York. It's when we did our first private equity raise, took on North Castle Partners as our partner. And that was the moment where I formally moved into the CEO role.
Why did you need to do that?
It was less about need and more about recognizing how the landscape was shifting. So originally, Barry's basically gave birth to the boutique fitness world. Like it didn't exist prior to that. So there was no competition. And, you know, flash forward, 10, 15 years later, all of a sudden other brands started to pop up. And I realized, we really need to accelerate our growth, and we need to get to new markets faster. And the easiest way, that I could think of was finding a private equity partner, which ended up being the best. I mean, they've been the most phenomenal partners, very values aligned, always focused on, culture, always allowing me and the team to invest where we felt we needed to.
So if somebody's never gotten their ass kicked at Barry's before, how would you describe the experience? If you haven't gone, don't go twice in one day like this crazy guy.
You basically move from treadmill, interval cardiovascular on the treadmill, to circuit strength training on the floor. The whole idea and the foundation is that you shouldn't prioritize one over the other. A lot of people over-index in cardio, some in strength. Barry's really wants to capture it all in one. And we also offer another product called Ride. So you're doing the same kind of experience, but with cycling instead of the running. We offer a third product called Lift, which is perfect for people who are injured and can't run or ride, or people that are doing their cardio elsewhere and want to do their strength training with us. So 3 different products in market right now. And I think the important distinction to make between Barry's and all the other, because odds are your listeners have tried, a workout out there.
Soul Cycle,
workout,
Orange Theory,
whatever it might be. Barry's is the only HIIT workout where you're combining strength and cardio that's fully immersive and like an emotional experience. Because the others, some of which you mentioned, like F45 and Orange Theory and all these are great and they mix cardio and strength, but music and performance is kind of secondary, whereas it's at the forefront of Barry's, right? And you notice today, like you're sprinting to the beat drop. And when you're sprinting, the floor is doing burpees and we create what's called hero moments. And
Oh,
it's
hero
all,
moments.
yeah, it's all like sort of laid out and perfectly planned so that people have that experience each time.
Is a hero moment when I was like throwing my hands in the air and dancing?
I think that was your hero moment.
I like you can go for everything. You go for a workout, you go to meet cute girls, you go to dance. It's kind of got it all.
Yeah, it really does. And it's, I think, one of the greatest strengths of the brand is that for 26 years, it's remained a place where you want to be seen. Barry's is just like a cool place, whether you're here in New York or in Paris or now in Barcelona, like it resonates with people. And it's a place that I think people are proud and they wear it as like a badge of honor, whether it's, someone like you or me or a big celebrity, like they'll take pictures at Barry's and post them. And
How do you build that? Like, obviously it took 26 years and a lot of intention.
Yeah.
What do you think have been kind of the pinnacle moments that have allowed you to build such a special brand and community?
Well, I think, at the core, it's authenticity. Barry did something original and something different, right? And I think that's like baked into the experience. Like you can feel it when you go to a Barry's class. In terms of how you stay relevant, that's constant gardening. That's something you have to be focused on 24 hours a day. We have brand operating separate. It's a totally separate function to marketing. So we have a robust brand team that's really just focused on how, Barry's speaks and looks. And, they have projects, as one example, called like Customers of Tomorrow, that's hyper focused on Gen Z and what's important and different about Gen Z as compared to millennials. So really starting to like lean into that, which, you can see sort of the results in our average customer age. We went from about 4 or 5 years ago, average Barry's client was like 33.7 years old, and today it's like 31.6. So you can kind of see the fruits of your labor when you invest in projects like that.
What pisses you off the most about your job?
I think it's probably when I get a message from a client, because I get them a lot, I'm a very accessible CEO, indicating that they had some kind of experience at Barry's that's very out of line with our values. But I have, obviously to gut check and, do a sanity check with my staff and always give people the benefit of the doubt. But when I don't really investigate anymore nowadays, but when the team looks into things and it is what the client said, it's always very, very disappointing.
You were talking about how you're pretty accessible,
Mm-hmm.
and I would agree. Like you and I, we met at a Barry's class in West Hollywood
Yeah.
a year ago and have been able to stay in touch since.
Yep.
It was so funny because when we met, it was literally my first Barry's class ever. And you're the first person I met after class.
Really?
Literally, Joey.
Oh, that's funny.
And we're talking, and I'm like, and you like asked what I do, and I'm like, blah, blah, blah. And then I'm like, so what do you do? And you're like, oh, I work for Barry's. And I'm like, oh shit, like, cool, what are you doing? You're like, CEO. I'm like, wait, did you just say CEO? And I'm like, this humble little bastard. I love him.
Oh, yeah.
You are so accessible and you're so out there. I'm curious if that ever has downsides and then being so open. And then the second question is, what is it that maybe we don't see about you in your life?
Yeah, I think the downside is just you're very open to criticism. And that comes in all shapes and forms. And so I will receive, like I said earlier, I'm on the receiving end of like what seems to be like an endless faucet of feedback, which like from a professional standpoint is one thing, but when it gets personal, it's always just kind of gross, and that's the downside, I think, of being somebody very public facing and available.
Do you let that get to your heart still, or have you kind of put up a shield and you're like, how to just kind of disregard those comments?
I think I've gotten better at kind of divorcing myself from having an emotional reaction to it, but it still affects you,
You still hear it. You're human.
Yeah, exactly.
We care what people think about us.
Exactly. Yeah.
Connor's in the studio, and we always have this joke that the most successful people we know respond within like 30 seconds.
That's really funny.
And we cannot figure it out. Because we're like, it takes us 2 days sometimes. I'm like, I got like 50 messages. I just need to be present in the moment,
Yeah.
Like we're running around today. People are texting me and I'm not going to get back to them for a little while.
Yeah.
How you respond within like a minute. And I'm so impressed. How do you do that?
I think it has its advantages and then it has its downside. The advantages are that you consistently make people feel special, heard, seen, like valued, right? Which is like, I think great. I hate when I text someone and it's like 2 days and I haven't heard back because I always just feel like, oh, I guess I'm not a priority. You don't do that, by the way. But the downside is then you're probably not as connected to the here and now and like what's happening. So I think what's great about the way you live your life is that you're probably very, aware and making the people that are physically around you feel special and paid attention to. But I don't think that's true that the most successful people get back right away.
Okay.
Because I feel like some of my most successful friends, maybe it's my most famous friends, like take forever.
Like Justin Timberlake.
Just some of them, he actually gets back right away. Yeah, I think it just depends on people's priorities and whether or not they're connected, what they're connected to at that time of the day.
Do you ever feel that trade-off with your family? Like, obviously, you're a super busy guy. You run an incredibly like high caliber schedule. You're all over the world.
Yep.
I'm really impressed by what you're doing, Joey.
Oh, thanks.
And I'm curious, like, how is that received at home? You have 2 beautiful kids, an amazing husband.
Yeah. My husband's so supportive, and he actually has restaurants in Southern California. So we switch off, and he'll travel a week out of the month, and then I'll travel 1 or 2 weeks out of the month. But we have always had this very, we're hyper entrepreneurial, always had so much respect for each other and what we're trying to do. So that is like incredible. With the kids, I always say when people say, how do you balance your life? I always say there's no such thing as balance. You just have to wake up and choose who you're going to disappoint. It's like it. There's no other way to explain it. And so like, I think my daughter probably feels it the most. So even when I left her at the airport in Denver and said, I'm only going to be gone for a day and a half, you could just see her eyes welling up. And it's just, that's the hardest.
That's got to be
part.
so tough.
Yeah. Once you have kids, it's hard to travel. And at the same time, there's so much value in showing your children how much you love what you do. And they are so proud of both of us, so like when we have to leave, they're sad, but they also love to talk about like berries and green leaf and, all of it. So
how'd you meet your husband?
So
as somebody who's still hunting, come on, give me some tips.
It's funny. He grew up in LA. I grew up in Chicago. He was in culinary school in Chicago when I moved to LA. So we just like basically missed each other. And then when he moved back to LA, 3 people tried to set us up, including Barry. And we just kept saying no, because at the time there was no social media. So you couldn't like check out for vibe or looks or any of it, like who someone's trying to set you up with. And at that age, it's like
true blind date.
I'm not getting blind set up at like 26 and a half years old. You know what I mean? It's plenty of fish in the sea. And so one of our friends was so adamant that he brought John to my class. And so that was how we first met.
He forced it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was it. He was like,
did you kind of know right away?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, immediately. And he was the first client I ever like was with. Because that was kind of like a rule I never broke. But then he took my class and I was like, oh no.
You kind of just know, right?
Yeah.
I haven't hit that, but people ask me like, oh, how was the date? And I'm like, oh, it was pretty good. And they're like, well, why aren't you more excited? Like, why isn't she the one? And you're like, I don't know, but like, that's what you just know when you know, right?
Yeah. There are different ways, I think, to fall in love. If you're looking for the storybook, then you know when you know.
What do you mean by that?
Some people don't know right away. And it's more of a friendship and a relationship that grows. And I think that's like another beautiful alternative. But for me, it was very much like love at first sight. And,
How long have you guys been together now?
Oh, man. 19 years.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
Dude, what's your skincare routine?
It's been a long time.
And our Uber drive over, we're talking about your brother and sister.
Yeah.
Who are twins.
Yep.
And also very high functioning.
Yes.
I'm sure that put a lot of pressure on you. And when we first met, you were telling me about your dad's story.
Mm-hmm.
And if I remember correctly, he's got a pretty fascinating one.
Yeah.
He came from Cuba.
Yeah.
How did he get from Cuba?
He left Cuba when he was 20, I think it was 26. And he tells the story of getting on a small boat and crossing the Atlantic Ocean to go to Spain, where he went to medical school and spent time in Madrid.
Wait, he took a boat from Cuba to Spain?
Yeah. And he always says, I almost died on that boat. But I can never tell with my dad because he exaggerates. But I'm sure it wasn't great.
Was he by himself?
No. This was not like an inner tube or like an upside down truck. This was like a boat that left Cuba that with, I don't know, probably like 10 to 20 people. Yeah, that was his experience. And then he moved to the States for his residency. First in Georgia and then eventually ending up in Chicago to practice pathology, which is microbiology. And, they're known to be just very cerebral, kind of antisocial physicians, but very smart. But my dad, was more than that. He had his job in the hospital, but he also had like a group, an association of Cuban pathologists in Chicago that started labs. So it's like, a third party when you do pap smear or blood slide or have a specimen or anything, you have to send it out to pathology. So not only did he have his like day job in the hospital, but he opened a series of labs in the Chicagoland area. So my dad worked all the time.
He's a hustler.
Total hustler. Both my parents were hustlers.
Your mom was Italian.
My mom, yeah, born and raised in Naples.
Wow.
Her father, such an inspiration to me, always just like trying to make a buck. Like I think he owned the first car in Sant'Arsenio, which was their small town. And he would charge people to like drive them from like the, liquor store home or
He
to
was
the
the first
grocery
Uber.
store. So he was, I always say he gave birth to Uber, but you didn't get any money or credit for it other than the, 50 cents he charged each way. But he, that was just one small thing that he did to get his family to the United States. He was always hustling. And my grandma and grandfather opened an Italian restaurant in Chicago. And, my mom was working for them from a really young age, from maybe 12, 13 years old. She would like work in the store. She'd help, he was a janitor at one point in the US and she'd help him. So, she grew up with both my parents, very, very hardworking ethic.
So what was life like for you as a child? A lot of sports? Were you academic?
No. So that's the thing. My brother and sister were very academic and incredible at sports. And I was neither.
Oh, poor little Joey. You got these twins above you, or just they stealing the spotlight.
Definitely, yes, very much so. And I was always kind of trying to think of the right word. Just felt like an outcast a bit because I didn't like sports. I didn't really discover like performing arts until later in life. I was like 13 or 14 when that happened. So growing up, I just kind of felt like I didn't know who I was and what I wanted to do. I wasn't physical, so I was always like overweight for the majority of my life until, probably like 14 or 15 years old.
Wow, that's so hard to believe.
Yeah.
Looking at you now, that's so cool. Just worked hard, and this life happened for you.
Yeah, I think, it really prepares you. We were talking earlier about like having siblings like that and having a childhood that is difficult and challenging. Just I think it prepares you for adversity in a way that maybe you're not prepared when life comes easier to you. So I've been able, I think, to handle a lot of challenges that have come my way over the years as a result of that.
Mm-hmm. How do you respond? Like, is there a challenge that you can think of?
Yeah, so it's funny because when I started to work I hired an executive coach in 2016 or 17, because as we started to sort of accelerate the engine for growth, I really wanted to be focused on how do I scale culture, because I know how to do the rest, but how do I scale culture? And I worked with him to kind of identify and establish our mission, vision, and values. But the first part of that was very like therapy heavy. Like I basically lie down on the couch and talk about 0 through 5 years old for like 2 hours. And then the next session, he just really wanted to like pop the hood and take a look at my engine and just figure out who I was. And through that work, I really discovered that every time I've hit sort of a roadblock in my life, I've found ways to kind of overcome it. One example is like when I was, 13 and I had like, I think at that point in time, I was playing a couple sports. I know I was playing football. I hated it. And I just was like so depressed with my life and felt super empty, and found a friend of the family like was auditioning people for a show downtown Chicago. And so I like had been studying singing and like felt very prepared, but worked so hard on my audition and showed up that day. And I remember like the kid who just finished touring with Les Mis, like all these people were there. And I was just this kid from, Arlington Heights who had zero on my resume. And somehow I booked it. And that began, like I created a new path for myself, right? Rather than sitting in my misery and being like, why don't I feel, purpose here? Like I just found it for myself, which is hard to do at 13, right? And thank God I had supportive parents who would like drive me downtown every day to rehearse. And, I was leaving school early and doing my homework in the seats, like as I was going up and off the stage. And that, created just like so much opportunity for me to learn and grow. And then the second time I can think of is when I was in my first year at USC. I didn't like it very much. I liked my second half of school, but that's because of what I'm about to tell you. I kind of fell into the same rut. Like I think every time I tried to like take the conventional path, it just didn't work for me. So like I joined a fraternity, and once again, I just didn't feel like I was connecting with the people around me in the way that I wanted to. And I remember calling my mom and saying, like, this isn't right. I don't want to be here. I don't want to be in LA. I don't want to go to USC. And she's like, okay, well, why don't you finish out the year? And her advice to me was that she feels like oftentimes when people have those kinds of issues, it's not the place, but it's the person. And so that was like really landed on me. And I was, super introspective at that point and thought like, wow, like it's so true. How could this is such an amazing school and this is such an amazing place. I'm sure I can, figure out a way to love it. But part of me also knew I had to like remove myself from the situation temporarily, and I wanted to honor that. So I found a program called Semester at Sea, which I know you'll love because you love traveling, and that like changed my life more than any other experience I've ever done. And I spent, the second half of my sophomore year on a boat for 100 days, visiting 14 different countries all across, South America, Africa, India, Japan, China.
Wow,
It
you guys
just
went
was
deep.
like, oh yeah. I went to Cambodia. I mean, I saw things I never thought I'd see, Vietnam, and just evolved. I felt like I came back 10 years older. And the second half of my college experience, I just like fully owned it, like who I was, who I wanted to be around, what I wanted to do. And so that was another example of like kind of hitting a roadblock and finding a way around it.
You were the CEO of the journey.
Yeah,
No one else
exactly.
was going to do it for you.
You have to take control of the journey and, hold your own reins and not lie in, this idea of being a victim, but actually go out and figure out like how to be empowered and how to make the most of your life.
That's super powerful, Joey.
Yeah.
Was there a country that sticks out the most of the 14?
I think probably India was my favorite.
You were in love with it because you kind of fall on one side or the other, right?
Very unexpected. And I luckily read a book that was about preparing yourself to like digest India. Because have you been to India?
I have not.
Very different. It's a total assault on your senses. It's like nonstop noise, and you're stepping over like cows and human feces, and it's just like a lot. But I read this book and it really helped me prepare for the experience. And just to give you an example, it talks about how like you are going to be faced with so many people begging in the streets, including a lot of children, which is very hard for Americans and people from the Western world to stomach. But you have to understand that a lot of times these children, that's like their job, and their parents ask them to go do that. And then when they're done, they go play. And it's like a whole performance. And that in fact, like a lot of Indians, specifically like Hindus, feel like they actually feel bad for us because they feel like we're stuck in this chain of desire of like wanting something, working for it, getting it, and wanting something else. Sound familiar?
Yes.
It's like very true. And they feel very connected spiritually, and they stay close to their families their whole lives. So it was just like interesting to read this whole book. And I remember getting to India and paying really close attention and seeing the kids. And of course I'd, give money many times, but then I would turn around, they would just like laugh and run off. It was don't want to discount how much disparity and sadness and hardship there is there, because there certainly is. But it's an amazing place. And there's a small town called Varanasi, which I had really like lost. I grew up Catholic, and I had really lost my faith and all sense of spirituality. And after having visited that place, somehow it was back for me. Not in the same, it wasn't really Catholicism or even Christianity at that, but just being in Varanasi and experiencing, it's a small town in the River Ganges where they do all the cremation ceremonies and everything. And you just can like inhale. Like when you're there, you're like, there's definitely something other than us. It's just so palatable and strong. So
has that stayed with you?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Definitely. It changes. I mean, I feel like my faith and my spirituality evolves and changes all the time, but I've never gone back to the place I was, I feel like, before that trip, which was just kind of emptiness.
That's beautiful. With the executive coach work, I'm curious if there's any other kind of habits or practices that he or she's instilled in you that have been most helpful.
He's big on meditation. So every session we did would start with meditation. Really spent a lot of time after the Mission Vision Values project working with the entire executive team and then other layers underneath as well. Just talking through like, you know, how to like relationship managing, essentially. You talk a lot about like the pillars of trust and, you know, how to effectively communicate. And then he'd be very focused on your thought world, which is the dialogue you have with yourself all day long that you don't pay attention to.
The inner roommate.
Yeah. And you know, the easiest way to sort of like address that is through meditation, because you really start to like, in that stillness, you can start to recognize like, oh my God, I have this whole layer of like sometimes insanity, other times like not, but I have this whole thing going on. I have this whole other movie in my mind that's happening, and it's impacting the way I treat others around me. And so that was really helpful. We actually start all our leadership meetings now with a meditation. So
no kidding.
Yeah.
How's that look?
Just it's usually like a 3 to 5 minute meditation, and we have weekly leadership meetings where the whole executive team comes together, and every single time we do that.
Does anybody think that's too voodoo and is like, Joey, come on, man, do we really have to do this again?
You know, if they, I'm sure there are some that do. If they do, they haven't like voiced their opinions, and I'm sure during that time they probably just continue on in their thought world, being like, what do I have to do? But those that, you know, most people have expressed, wow, that's really helpful for me to come to that meeting and like just like chill for 3 to 5 minutes. And especially like if you're coming to it, you know, coming in hot or worked up about something, or you have something personal going on, it just is always like an appreciated, like blood pressure just comes a little bit lower and people can have better, higher quality conversations.
Wow. I bet you're so much more productive.
Yeah.
After doing those.
I think so.
That's cool. Anything else from the coach?
I mean,
those are the main ones.
I loved the way he led that Mission Vision Values project. Was so great because it wasn't just like the leadership team coming together to talk about what was special about Barry's. It was a very thorough, kind of deep survey across the entire organization, every employee population, asking people like, what does Barry's mean to you? What do you think about this brand? How do you feel about, how have you felt working here? And so the output of that is really what the leadership team then worked on and with to come up with the Mission Vision Values. His name's Martin Hubbard, and he's actually a published author, and he's a pretty amazing guy.
He sounds awesome.
Yeah.
So I got to meet some of your friends this weekend.
You did?
Yes. I was at Aspen Food and Wine Festival.
Okay.
And I was talking to these guys like, oh, we live in Miami. And I was like, oh my gosh, you know, I'm talking to Joey. I'm with them in New York this week. And they're like, oh my gosh, we're in YPO together. And I was like, what should I ask Joey about? And they were like, he is one of the most community-driven people that we know.
Uh-huh.
And he's done so much for the YPO chapter. They couldn't say enough amazing things about you,
sweet.
Which was really cool. And I'm just curious, like, what community means to you. You know, like I kind of hear you talking about how you felt like an outcast back in the day.
Yeah.
So I feel like you've probably been even more intentional about building your communities.
Yeah. For me and the work, you know, I've tried to do at Barry's is very focused around inclusivity. And so Barry's was a place, so Barry J was like a very, you know, similar upbringing to me, grew up here in New York, and loved musical theater and felt very much like an outcast, gay Jewish boy who then moved to, you know, Los Angeles to be a music writer. His story is a little bit tougher because he became addicted to drugs and alcohol, and that was like a really big challenge for him. But I think that his, recovery is very much like foundationally what Barry's is about, which is like Barry wanted to create a party environment where you are not doing drugs or drinking alcohol, but
We
you
love
still,
that.
Yeah,
we
you
need
just,
more of that, Joey.
yeah, you
please.
still feel the like euphoria of it, and you can still feel like you're in a dance club having fun.
We're trying to be done with the 4 a.m. nights. 8 a.m. Barry classes we're in.
Yeah. But he sort of kicked it off, and when I took the reins, I inherited a place that, like, from Barry's perspective, he was always like, the weirder the better. Like, he would, never think twice about hiring people that were different. And that really like showed itself in the ethos of what the brand was. And I really wanted to, as we scaled it, make sure that the community reflected those values as well. So just making sure that, you asked what community means to me. The community I want to be a part of and the community I want to foster is a place where everybody feels sort of like safe and accepted, and celebrated. And, that's been like hopefully a part of my legacy and what I'll leave behind.
Yeah. I think it's so key. And if a listener doesn't have that sense of community in their life, right, they feel like they're kind of misaligned on that, what advice do you have for them to go and find that?
Well, nowadays, with the internet, like there's so much opportunity to connect with humans no matter where you are. It didn't used to be like that, right? So if you're in the middle of Iowa and you're very different, life
Growing
was
corn.
challenging. I think there's so much community everywhere nowadays that my advice would be focus on something you love, right? For me, obviously that's fitness, but like for someone else, it might be art, or for someone else, it might be music. And look around and try to find, different groups and different communities that you can become a part of, because when you have a really meaningful, strong common denominator, I think it's pretty easy to be accepted and to accept everybody around you.
Do what you love.
Yeah.
It's amazing. What do you feel like is going to be like next for Barry's? I mean, you guys have 88 studios, right? 15 countries. You're going on 26 years.
Yeah.
What more can you guys do?
Oh gosh. Been around for 26 years. We actually have far fewer studios than a lot of other, brands that came into the equation decades after us. So we've had a very slow, tempered, thoughtful growth strategy up until this point. And I don't see that changing necessarily, but I am excited. The pandemic, really pumped the brakes on our growth. And so I am excited now coming out of it, like to start to open, at least a dozen to maybe 15 studios a year for the next few years. I think there's a lot of potential for the new modalities I talked about earlier, which is the ride concept and the lift concept. And our vision statement is to transform lives worldwide. And so, the more that we can do that and execute on that while balancing the sort of like brand equity piece, that's like, the exciting part for me.
It's so cool. We were talking about community. The fact that like when I was in Paris with my family for Christmas and needed a couple hours away from them, God bless them, I love them, but needed a couple hours. And I was like, I know I can go find my community at Barry's in Paris.
Yeah.
Bought a class for $35, popped in, made a bunch of friends, had an amazing workout.
Oh, good.
It's just,
awesome.
It's a blessing. So thank you for giving that to us.
Oh my God, of course. Thank you
for
being a part of it.
Yeah. What would younger Joey from Arlington Heights think about everything you've gone on to do?
Oh my God. I mean, no, any single person who knew me, whether it's family or friends, is mind blown because I don't think anyone pegged me for making an impact in
the Underdog did it
100%. Like,
let's
everyone's
go.
Always, whenever I run into people, they're just like, I can't believe it.
Joey Gonzalez?
Exactly.
From freaking 8th grade?
Exactly. I did not win most likely to succeed. But, I came from underneath and really shocked them all.
You did it, man.
Yeah.
Well, I feel so lucky to have you as a friend.
Oh, thanks.
And thank you for getting my butt in the gym this morning.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you
Thanks
for taking
coming.
an hour to do this. And
of course.
Looking forward to seeing what you and your family continue to do, man.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Joey.